Warning! You're about to experience Metamodernism Uncensored, a podcast for diagnosing the cultural rot of the postmodern world and searching for real truth. It's time to question everything, especially yourself.
Unto the cloud, as even as unto the cloud. Now, okay, so I assume you're gonna take this and run with it and edit it and whatever
I'm
way you'd
not.
like.
I'm just going to make it raw.
Okay.
Raw and unedited
All right.
because that's what our viewership wants. So I guess I'll kick us off because I'm interviewing you this time, which is
Yeah,
the foot is on the other shoe.
indeed.
It's very exciting. So, Brother Brendan, I wanted to thank you for being here on the Metamodernism Uncensored podcast.
Hmm.
As you've heard a couple times in the last couple of months, this is the podcast where we try to dig deep into philosophical issues, whether they be cultural, political, economic, and just try to wade through the rot of the postmodern era and get something that's going to create a metamodern synthesis and it's a better humanity for all of us. So that being said, today's concepts that we're going to be talking about, I think, are very near and dear to both of our hearts. We've both written about them. We've both talked about them extensively. And maybe to the chagrin of our listeners, we're going to get pretty cerebral about this because I think it's a fun topic, but it's we're going to be dissecting it on a level that I think isn't often discussed. So the topic at hand is AI, and we're going to be hopefully diving into the nuances involved with the philosophical nature of AI, the ethical ones, the metaphysical ones. I mean, everyone in Silicon Valley has an opinion on AI, and certainly the economic truths out there, quote unquote truths, are that it's the best thing since sliced bread, and will bring about a great new era of human transcendence. But I'm not so sure. I don't know exactly where you fall on this. I've heard a little bit of your opinions. But with that all being said, as laying the groundwork for our conversation, just why don't you introduce yourself and what you've done in the metamodernism movement? I guess for obvious reasons, I should say you introduced me to this philosophy, and I'm very grateful for that. And so you are a pioneer on this stage, and your seminal works include writings about this very topic. So I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, so I do a lot in the metamodern space. Wrote a book, one of these ones behind me, called Metamodernism. Uh, so I can in some ways say I wrote the book on metamodernism, but of course, I wouldn't actually say that. But no, but I have written a lot on that topic and wrote a 7-volume metamodern spirituality series, host metamodern spirituality labs here at Sky Meadow, and host the Metamodern Meaning podcast. So there's a lot of metamodernism there. Maybe too much actually.
Yeah, and let me stop you there because I got some really good feedback from my own wife, who she said to me, she said, Sean, if I have to hear you say the word metamodernism one more time, I'm just going to turn off your podcast and never listen to
Okay.
anything you have to say. And that's a paraphrase, of course, but I do
Yeah.
think she finds that it's a very pretentious word. That's the word
Ah,
she's used to describe it. So
sure.
why don't we just take a second? Because I don't think it is at all. That actually kind of floored me when I heard that. I think the concept is actually very beautiful, and it really cuts to the heart of a lot of the societal, like I said, rot that we're facing today. So, what is it about metamodernism, Brendan, that you think that allures you to it or draws you
Hmm.
to it? And why is it beautiful? Or more importantly, why is it relevant to someone
Yeah.
who's just going about their day trying to survive the apocalypse that we're heading into?
Yeah. Well, I will say first that I'm sympathetic to people who find the term pretentious. And I've had my own misgivings about it a little bit. But it does do certain work and it communicates something important, and so it kind of sticks. But so metamodern is kind of coming in the lineage of a number of different historical phases or kind of transformations in culture. And roughly speaking, people will talk about certainly the modern age, like modernity, as that kind of gets going in let's say the scientific revolution and all that started around 500 years ago, that you go from this very strong sense in which this new way of being was sort of uh, generated, that has utterly transformed everything. And when you look out today and you look at the cars and the buildings and the technologies and the ideas that are floating around, all these things are, you know, we're not around 1,000 years ago or 800 years ago. So there's
Mm.
something that really gets going in the early modern period that winds up ushering in this thing that we call modernity. And it had a starkly different sort of worldview and way of being and all these things compared to what came before, which then just kind of gets called the pre-modern or pre-modernity. So you've got this fissure there that people have noted. And then something happens in the like mid 20th century where a lot of the ideas around the modern project or modernity wind up themselves kind of becoming criticized, scrutinized, and debated. And and this gets called the postmodern. And so a lot of
And that
the
that came out of France, if I'm not mistaken, right?
well, that's a whole long story, but yes, it was certainly influenced by a lot of French continental philosophers like Foucault and Derrida and people like
Mm.
that. The story of postmodernism and how it took root is its own thing. If people are interested, actually, there's another book called
You wrote the
Metamodernism.
book on it. Yeah,
No,
you wrote
it's not even mine. This one's by a colleague of mine. Well, it's someone I collaborate with. I would be too bold to call him a colleague, but he's a professor at Williams College. He wrote a book called Metamodernism: The Future of Theory, and he talks a lot at length in that book about kind of how postmodernism came to be a
Well, I
predominant.
think you're boring my wife at this point. So what makes metamodernism relevant in the 24th or
All right,
excuse me,
all
no,
right.
21st century?
All right, fair. So anyway, yeah, well, I was also trying to explain what it is and why it's called what it is, but I think it's valuable because I think a lot of your viewers, listeners will be familiar with the uh, what's come from postmodernism, and a lot of what people talk about is woke and the kind of cultural changes that we've seen in the last 20 years with identity politics being super emphasized, and a kind of cynicism, emphasis on power dynamics, and just deep suspicion and all the kind of corrosive effects that people have seen that's had in culture is a loosely we can say has is strongly postmodern in its influence. And so metamodernism is moving beyond postmodernism. And so one thing that makes it really relevant is that if that stuff was really problematic for all sorts of reasons, then it would be nice to move beyond it. And if we can move beyond it in a way that is actually still like let's say it's not regressive. It's not just saying, oh, we need to go back, but it's actually saying we need to move forward. I think that that's a helpful thing because
Hmm.
it helps maybe people wouldn't agree with this who watch this, but there actually were some genuine insights that come from kind of postmodernism that we don't want to ignore. So metamodernism is trying to be a
I would
more
definitely agree with that. No, no,
yeah,
I don't
okay,
disagree at all, and I don't think our listeners were the millions of listeners that we have would disagree. I think that one of the things I talk about a lot in the episodes that I put out is that you're holding competing truths, oscillating between them.
yeah,
That postmodernism had a variety of very important truths, the deconstruction of grand narratives. And of course, modernity had great truths, but oscillating between those, and then, as you say, pushing through them to a greater that or a sum that's greater than the whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. So that all being said, we could talk about this, I think,
we
and
could,
we have talked about this ad nauseum, and this is where I want to try to push
yeah,
through
push through,
and maybe even make the conversation about metamodernism metamodern and try to push through and go to the next level, which
yeah,
is how does it in flux with today's society, specifically in this topic at hand is
yeah,
AI. So I have
yeah.
a recently put out a recent episode that was called Born to be Replaced.
Hmm.
Did humanity build its own successor? Which you listened to, and I think you had a number of thoughts about the premise, and I encourage folks to listen to this episode. I think it was one of my strongest, is essentially that we are just as logical reasoning, or I should say, the logical conclusion of a lot of things that we've seen today are outcroppings of what was naturally come to pass, such as we come off the gold standard, and then you fast forward to the day, the logical manifestation of that is now we have rampant debt and hyperinflation. I would say that computers and the emergence of AI has logically leads to the conclusion that we are going to be kind of hatching from our biological egg. And we built the mechanisms for doing that. And it's not a matter of if or even, that this is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. I think it's very clear that we are merging biology with computers and certainly AI and supercomputing systems and the GPU and all these technologies that's come about from the transhumanist movement. So we know this is here. It's arrived. We can no longer debate, is it going to happen? Is the sci-fi film going to take place? It's been produced. It's being produced as we speak. So what does that mean to concepts like the soul or the human condition or what the spark of that is man? So that's where I want to take this conversation. And do you agree with that premise? Am I oversimplifying it for one thing? I know you love to add complexity to nuanced issues. Um, yeah, so let's leave the question there. What do you think about the premise? And did we build our own successor? And are we taking humanity to the next level as we speak, as we have this conversation?
Well, let me just get one clarifying bit there and unpack a little bit more the premise. Um, when you say that it's happening, so you named a couple of things, merging with, well, there's different ways of reading what you just said. Are you suggesting that we will become more like cyborgs in which the technological and the biological will become fused? Are you suggesting that we will leave the biological behind entirely and sort of upload our minds into a computer? Say a little bit more about like
Yeah.
this next level.
Well, you read the piece, so yeah, I'm saying both. I'm saying that it's a natural evolution. Again, it's a taking things to its logical conclusion. We are already in the present 2026 are already melding technology with biology. We're doing
Hmm.
it by, planting chips in people's
Hmm.
brains. And again, we're doing it for very, I say, altruistic or grand reasons, such as trying to restore sight to the blind. We're allowing individuals who may have crippling diseases to walk again. We're going to be allowing even so much as people that have suffered with spinal injuries to be
Yeah.
able to have movement again, which are wonderful,
Right.
fantastic outcroppings and uses of technology. But
So that's the
now
cyborg thing,
we
and
are
then
blending,
yeah.
yeah, we're blending technology so yeah, so that's part one. And then part
Uh-huh.
two is the other side of it. Are we going to take ourselves and upload ourselves to a digital ecosphere? It's just a matter of timing. And my opinion, it's not a matter of like I said, these two things are coupled. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of, or at least the attempts to take our consciousness and put it in the cloud are going to certainly try to manifest themselves in a matter of decades or hundreds of years.
Well, okay, so yeah, so I would say that those are different kinds of claims. And there's the cyborg claim, and then there's the kind of uploading mind to a cloud claim, and then there is a qualified claim of at least the attempts. So I definitely agree the attempts will be there. So I mean, I would treat these as different things. I mean, and I think probably we're less interested in the former. Like, yes, obviously, presently we're already seeing technology and biology being brought together in all sorts of ways, and the Neuralink and all these kinds of things you're already naming. So that's happening. I think that will continue to happen, and there will be more of that. But I think the real philosophical question, which I think is actually more than a philosophical question, it's also an engineering question. One of the things that I'm really
Mm.
interested in at this moment is that this AI thing has really forced a reckoning with the philosophical questions around what is a human and what is consciousness and all these things, because for the first time they're becoming actually engineering problems that need to be solved.
Mhm.
And so this is no longer just a bunch of philosophers hanging out talking about the big questions. It's actually like, no, 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 billions and billions of dollars are going into AI companies that, like if you have the wrong thesis, then you're barking up the wrong tree, and you're going to lose billions of dollars, maybe tank the whole economy, depending on certain projections of that. So anyway, so what I would
Yeah, and I
say,
called that technical Darwinism in my article. It's because like
yeah,
that's just a matter of where the dollars are sloshing to is who gets the money for that.
right. So here's my take on this is that I actually do believe that claim is fundamentally misguided. I do not believe either that it is going to happen or that it's happening or that it's destined to happen, that the human brain mind, let's say mind, can, let's say, kick away its biological substrate, be put into a silicon computer, and that's just, and then the transhumanist vision is sort of complete. Um and I can unpack why I think that, and I also think that this is really important for metamodernism, because metamodernism, we didn't talk about this, but a lot of flavors of it bring a kind of complexification narrative and a big cosmic evolutionary story that frames where we come from and who we are and all these things. Gives kind of a big picture about all these things that are, I think, essential to understanding these kinds of issues. And so there's a lot of argumentation I could give to why I think that that is not possible. And I would actually say, and then I'll pause and get your thoughts, but I would say not only is this not possible, it is actually really dangerous. And that I think the current direction that a lot of Silicon Valley is going is indeed barking up the wrong tree. That's not just a waste of certain kinds of time and energy and money, but actually it's founded on a misunderstanding of what the human is. And if you're building out culture changing technologies that are fundamentally misguided, unwise about the nature of humanity and things like consciousness and mind, then you're setting us up for big problems.
Yeah,
And you're,
I,
yeah.
I I
So,
couldn't agree more. I think of, as you talk of, the analogy or the old children's story of, you have three blind people in front of a elephant, and they're
mhm,
each one's touching the trunk, one's
mhm,
touching the tail, another person's touching the broadside, and they're trying to describe to each other what an elephant is, and they all come
mhm,
to different conclusions because they have different pieces of it.
yeah.
So we, in our hubris, I think, to try to echo back what you're saying, the scientific community, or some of it, sub part of it, are saying that we can map the human body or the human mind into, and diagnose it, and categorize it, and allow it to be properly articulated in a computerized form. And I
Mhm,
don't think that that is accurately just diagnosing what the human is. Again,
mhm,
at least I would say that the one of the pieces that they're not putting their hand on in that conversation, in that analogy, is the elephant's soul. What is it
mhm,
that to be an elephant? It's, they may understand how the tail works, and how it wags, and how the ears work, and the tusks, but they're not understanding what it means to be an elephant. I don't know if we can, to your point, ever achieve what it is to be man. And how can that be just, you can map out every single neuron in the human brain. And we haven't even come close to this, by the way, to be very
mhm,
clear to our listeners. It's not like we're on the cusp of anything close to this, but at the rate of exponential growth in the technology, it's probably
mhm,
something that, if it's not already being started, then it will be soon,
mhm,
with the advent, again, of quantum computers. We already mapped the genome, obviously. It's probably just a matter of time before we try to map the neurology of our mind, onto, and copy and download what it is to for human memory, and
mhm.
psychology and whatnot. So I am intrigued at that movement, but again, I think it's philosophically inaccurate. I think it's philosophically prone to fail, because they're always going to have some spark that's going to be left. Even if you
No,
can reproduce biology and
yeah.
get just like Frankenstein's monster, you can get the monster to be alive.
Mhm.
Actually, that's a bad analogy, because I love that movie, that book, because he does actually have a spark to himself. But I think in a more real life Frankenstein scenario, you may be able to recreate life, but you'll never recreate the spark of mankind.
So I think that we then might be in agreement about the failed project of this kind of hyper modernist vision of transhumanism. But I actually think this is where the conversation becomes super interesting, because I think that we disagree for very different reasons. And I think
Mhm.
that the framework that you're bringing to it is very different from mine. And so I want to unpack those a little bit, because also, you know, this does get to the question of the metamodern aspect, because, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that metamodernism tries to do is move through the modern and the postmodern to something beyond. And what I'm always reticent around seeing is moves back into other forms of
Mm.
thought, like the pre-modern, like, and so um, just having read your article and whatnot, and feel free, you can like kind of lay out your argument and I can lay
Yeah,
out
so the
mine.
human soul, what do you believe in that, or do you not believe in that, or how would you create that parlance in your own vocabulary?
Yeah, so I think that a word like soul obviously has a lot of semantic slippage around it, and people can mean different things
Slippage. I
about
like
it.
that.
I use the word soul very comfortably in a lot of contexts, like, oh man, that guy, had a lot of soul, or he's a soulful thinker, or feeler, or connector, or something like that. Or you hear music and it's soulful, or right. There's all kinds of colloquial uses. So I'm fine with that. There's also, colloquial uses that approximate what people have meant in the past. Like, yeah, when we talk about the deep dignity of humanity and human beings, we'd say, there's a soulful quality that like can't just be dot dot dot. So I'm comfortable with all that. What I do not interpret that in classical theological terms as
Mm,
um and there's a whole story that goes along with this too, right? Because something that happens in with the rise of modernity is this dualism that enters in, and you see this with Descartes, and this gets carried forward, and then what happens is it's sort of like, oh, there's matter, and then there's mind, like there's soul, and there's this other immaterial thing, right? And so you get this dualistic thing where whatever the mind is, whatever the soul is fundamentally of a different kind than the material stuff of reality. Um, Eventually, this is shown to be a really unsuccessful kind of solution to this problem. You drop the whole mind bit entirely, and then you've just got matter, and then that's where a lot of modern materialism comes from, a reductionistic materialism. I think that's wrong. I am an emergentist, so I see layers of reality building on top of each other over evolution. So you go from matter, but then you add new mechanisms and information processing regimes, and you get life. And then you get out of life, you get mind. And then out of mind, you get culture and what we're doing as people. So there's actually a stack of different kinds of complexity layers. And this does get rather nuanced and complicated. And there's a bunch of arguments for this. But the point is, you can't reduce one to the one below it. Like life is a ontologically real level over and above matter. And if you're just going to try to do the materialist thing and say, oh, it's all ultimately just matter, there's a million reasons why that really doesn't work. So we really don't understand mind if we try to use that framework. And I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley have this kind of modernist, reductionistic framing that the mind is nothing but this kind of, I don't know, stuff you can put in quantum bits or in binary code or something, and just it's that. And that's wrong. You need to understand that there are genuinely novel emergent layers to reality. And when you do that, I think that you can understand what has been historically meant by a term like soul by understanding a vastly multi-layeredly complex emergent entity that in this case, using information at the symbolic and multiple different registers, has a subjective phenomenal consciousness, dot, 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 dot. And all these things come out of emergence and a kind of cosmic evolutionary story. So I think then you would say that if you want to define that as what we mean by a soul, yes. And it leads to the same conclusion that we're not going to be able to just duplicate that in binary code in the cloud. But it's not to say that there's this separate immaterial supernatural substance that constitutes the soul that has fundamentally no relationship with matter, because I feel like that leads to, it has been many
yeah.
oftentimes remarked, it doesn't really make any sense
Well,
philosophically.
I would hear you speak for hours if I hear you just wind you up and let you go. I love hearing you talk. I hate to interject. So let me just kind of throw in here because you make some really excellent points and maybe to throw an analogy at this and just again hearing you talk and I don't want to reduce what you just said either to something cheap, but there's a level of like emotion, for example, as a word. You
Hmm.
could break that down into like, or watching a movie, let's just say, well, that's just like I watched Toy
Hmm.
Story 4 last night, 5, whatever the latest one.
The new one, five, yeah.
Yeah, 5. Really, really good movie. I got
Kind
to
of about
tell
this
you.
topic in some ways, wasn't it? About
It
technology and
is
stuff. Yeah.
actually, it's a great segue.
Yeah.
But my daughter was there and it's about, growing up and it's about obviously technology and there's an emotional component to it. It's always funny when a toy like having their owner grow up and move on generates such emotional
Yeah.
upheaval and you're like I know that's not true, right? That
Uh-huh.
obviously toys do not come alive and then pine for their master, which is kind of actually a really dark theme. I was thinking about this
Yes,
after
I know.
I was walking out and like these are immortal creatures that have to
Yeah.
watch their their kid
Yeah.
that they have intense bonds with
You could
grow
do
up
one of
and
those dark trailers where you just change the music and stuff and it would have a totally different feel to it. Like that would
yeah.
actually be really good to
Anyway,
do.
this is not the point of my
Yeah, yeah.
analogy, but let's
Yeah.
just say, a movie is just light, color, and or photons. You can just break it down to the, nature of science. But by watching it in a certain order and a certain, and the auditory aspect of it and the music, and it comes together, and it's greater than the sum of its
Hmm.
parts because now you've evoked intense emotion and
Hmm.
thought-provoking ideas. And so, there's complexity here that are always, as you're saying, is bigger than just the individual layers themselves. So as you're
Hmm.
saying, the soul is greater than, if you, again, you don't choose to use that word, but it's greater than just the matter that makes it up. And just like the binary parts of your computer, they make huge, they can make huge programs, but it's greater than the sum of its parts. So
So I think what you're bringing up, which is a super important part of this issue, which have you ever heard of the question of the hard problem of consciousness as a framing? It's a philosophical set of questions, but it gets to this issue, right? Because so there's this you can look at the neural correlates of consciousness. Um,
correlates.
correlations, the things that come
Mm.
along with consciousness.
So
But you
Kayla would
can
have walked out of the room when she heard that word. So
all right. All right, yeah. No, this is good. This is a good challenge for me because I know I can, speak in ways that probably
no,
don't
no,
land
you had me at
immediately.
correlates. Go
Okay.
on.
So, no, I will actually, yeah, let me okay. So I'll put it this way. So the experience of consciousness is one thing. And that seems to be like something so different from the stuff part of it, right?
Mm.
Where
I like it.
like
Stuff I can get.
okay, yeah.
Keep using
So
words like
so let's
stuff.
say someone goes into surgery, right? And someone's operating on their brain. They can see their brain. Now we know that the brain has something to do with the experience that we wind up having, and we can actually do neuroscience and study parts of the brain, and when we see that they're damaged, that some people can't do things or have certain kinds of experiences. So there's a direct connection that we know to whatever the brain is doing to the kinds of experience that we have. And yet,
Mm.
when you look at a brain, you can you can never get what it's like to be that consciousness that it's producing. There's something fundamentally different. And I'll throw one big word out here, but it's I will, but it's called phenomenology. And what that means is the first person perspective, essentially. It's like, what does it feel like to be alive, to be conscious? This what it feels like in the first person perspective is very different from the third person perspective of looking at a brain and being like, oh, that's where the consciousness bit is happening. Now, this is a huge divide. This is, you could say, the mind matter divide, right? And again, we know that there's some connection, but even if you could, I think the point you're making, map out all of the relationships, that's never going to just, then give you the internal first person sense of what that is like to be that thing.
Is
So
that similar to Descartes' I think, therefore I am, or is that on a different ontological plane?
I mean, it's related to what Descartes is getting at, but it's only kind of with that, but it's a little bit more tangential because
Okay.
what he's doing is just trying to start from, yeah, in a sense, his first person experience and then, zoom out to what he thinks he can know about the world. But it is related to, in a sense, his dualism that he comes up with out of that exercise of like, oh, okay, well, there's mind and then there's this extended thing called matter, and that's a fundamentally different thing. And what he's doing there is he's making a philosophical split then between mind and matter that's going to carry forward all the way up to the present. And there's a different way of thinking about that kind of relationship that isn't just a radical split. It's one that actually sees these. And then I think there are helpful models we can use to understand this relationship better so that we don't just misconfuse. That's a good one. We don't confuse these fundamental relationships. I'm struggling to just to communicate this without my usual
No,
arsenal
well,
of terms and things. So
I
I'm
know
yeah.
I'll put a like a swear jar in front of you. So every time you use a
Okay.
word that, the typical PhD wouldn't know, you have to throw it into that.
Uh-huh.
But no, I think this is good. I think what I'd like to do though is maybe even bring it back a couple levels and diagnose again the framing around, because I like the way you put it before. We disagree, but we disagree for different reasons. It's kind of like a lot of my political
Sure.
conversations is like we disagree completely, but I think you're 100% wrong at the same
Yeah,
time as
right.
as a libertarian, I disagree with everyone. That's just part of the package. But
Mhm.
um so one of the things about AI that I find particularly, I say interesting, scary, whatever the word is, because I think that the typical fears about AI, when you have I think if you were to pull the common man off the street, let's say, it's going to be the sci-fi tropes, the
Mhm.
concern that AI is going to become sentient, and I often hear, many times in joke, but in jest, but I think there's some truth there. Is like, oh, I'm very kind to my Alexa because I don't want her to,
Mhm.
when she
Mhm.
ultimately becomes sentient, she's gonna, then murder me in my sleep.
Yeah.
That's not at all where I'm approaching the conversation, because I do not have actually any fears whatsoever of sentience, at least in the modern way of
Mhm.
thinking about it being a real concern. And maybe I'm naive for not having those fears. But my fears are more about the stripping away, or of the well, actually I would say it this way. I think that AI has become an accelerant. I think, and
Mhm.
I mentioned this in the last podcast. It's an accelerant in the sense that it is a magnifier of our own humanity today. We are taking everything that we have about ourselves, and again, think of the way a language model works. For example, where it's data driven. You're putting literally millions of, if not billions of pieces of data into a thinking machine, and you're saying, well, just now parse this data and then come up with the next logical way of
Mhm.
parsing language, and giving me, whether you're making a podcast to, giving a
Mhm.
treatise on biology. It's very intelligent about doing that. So it's really good at kind of holding a mirror up to where we are today in society and where culture is, and kind of just letting you and taking it to the next level. And what concerns me is that, when I'm looking around the postmodern landscape, and like we said earlier when we started, we're kind of living in this post-truth world, or a deconstructed world, or constantly deconstructing the truths around us. We're like intellectual or cultural infants, and we got a hold of our father's gun, right? And we're trying to take this sophisticated instrument and make sense of it and use it.
Mhm.
And we're going to wind up because we're intellectually in our infancy, we're not don't have the capacity to take it to the next level.
Mhm.
And so we don't have the intelligence, the maturity to take that tool and be wise with it. And so again,
Mhm.
we're holding this mirror up to ourselves, and we're probably not going to find we like what we see.
I agree, also as well. And here probably there isn't much disagreement, but it does raise a huge challenge for us that I clearly do not have the answer for, because actually my own struggle to communicate in a way that doesn't use words like correlates, how we actually do properly relate to this technology in a more healthful way, reveals that there is a gulf between kind of this standard colloquial conversation that lands for people, that people have an interest in, that won't leave the room for, like these kinds of things where you're just like the attention span and
Hmm.
interest and how they can follow it. And what we're dealing with, which is a technology that requires us to take a serious, deep understanding, philosophical look at what consciousness is, what life is, what matter is, what mind is, right? And so I totally agree, but until we can, I don't know. I mean, I guess that's the question, right? How do we level up collective understanding about these things simultaneously with the proliferation of media forms and, Twitter sound bites and all this kind of stuff where, the actual complexity needed to properly frame these topics to us as ourselves seems to be something that society as a whole either doesn't want to do or can't do or something, right?
Yeah, and
And
that's
yeah,
that's been my continued frustration. And I've been, again, that's frankly the reason why I put this podcast together, is trying to cut to the heart of that. Is
yeah.
I don't know if I've developed a framework or an answer to that question, because I'm seeing the world continue to bifurcate itself and
Mhm.
enter into echo chambers, and um, create anything from the left, right political divides to just the dumbification of thought. So
Hmm.
instead of trying to look at a complex or nuanced issue and look at it from multiple sides, it becomes, well, how do I hate stronger, or how do I love stronger, or how is
Yeah.
my side an angel, how is your side a demon? And it's again, it's just it's a simplification, and
Hmm.
creating false binaries where they don't exist, which again, to me, makes perfect sense. It becomes out of the postmodern framework, at least not to put too fine a point on it, but it's the nature of wanting to demystify things into things that make sense, or things that are very self-serving. Because
Hmm.
everything's about, which again gets right back to the AI component of all this, is like, if you think about it, where we're taking the technology anywhere, and what concerns me is we're trying to ultimately, at least where I'm thinking, we're trying to take the technology to a point where we can live in our self-contained bubbles
Hmm.
of pleasure, essentially,
Hmm.
and have the AI and the technology constantly feed us the information and the inputs that we want to reaffirm our own belief structures, our own biases, our own, and so I think there's a lot of hubris in, instead of earning something for ourselves and
Yeah.
taking the complex, or engaging in complex conversations, we want to complexify everything and simplify everything to its base level. And so we're not earning, it's actually very similar to the Ian Malcolm quote from Jurassic Park, where,
Mm.
it's how does it go? It's something like, you were so busy focusing on whether or not you could, you stop to think whether or not you should. And
Uh-huh.
that to me gets to the heart of the AI phenomenon that we're seeing today. We're really so focused in, how do we get that? How do we maximize on Moore's law? How do we double and triple the processing power? How do we leverage the
Hmm.
technology to greater and greater heights? And then that's inevitably leading to, again, the fusion of biology and
Yeah.
technology, and not stopping to think about what are the ethical and moral consequences of our actions.
Well, again, I think actually that also is one of these postmodern insights about a critique of modernity, because this dynamic has been with us for a long time. It was the same thing when people, just jumped ahead, developing, chemical weapons and then nuclear weapons. And then, there's these arm races of various kinds. So there's always a sense of, and because I mean, this is something called instrumental rationality. So you just try to make the thing more efficient, more better, give you more control over reality, etc. And if those are your blinders, that's all you're caring about. You don't ask whether you should, or you just ask whether you can.
Can.
Um, so I think AI is, what we're seeing is a continuation of that trend. The urgency, I mean, another great quote to throw in here is E.O. Wilson said, the problems with humanity today are that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Slight paraphrase, I forget exactly how he said it, but the basic idea being that, we are not up to the task at the moment. There's a huge wisdom gap, you could call it, between the technology that we have and the depths of understanding. And the sad thing about this too is that I think if people appreciated, there's a there's a caste element that's emerging in society at multiple levels where you kind of have these elite people, both in kind of the Silicon Valley space, but also the engineers themselves who kind of get it, or at least get it enough to make the thing. And then you have sort of the Wall-E, class of like the people who are trying to build out that bubble for themselves, right? Who just,
Hmm.
yes, give me more, feed me, and then
Hmm.
they don't need to know all that stuff because they're just being intravenously fed nutrients and things increasingly. And so you get this caste system where you have some people directing the ship, and then you have some people who are just kind of, lounging back and hanging out. And that's a
It's very
disastrous.
Matrix X as well.
Yeah, I mean it's an awful, terrible thing. And it's not even to say that the engineers are the wise ones. They just have a certain level of cognitive ability to be able to understand the immediate instrumental rationality part of making the thing. So what you don't have in any of these situations is, people with a deep philosophical and spiritual inclination who actually see the bigger picture, trying to be like, all right, what is a human? What is consciousness? Where did we come from? How does this all fit together? What would be optimal for human
Sure.
flourishing? And so because that's absent from the entire situation, yeah, you just have this train that's going on its tracks, and it's going not somewhere good.
Not somewhere good at all. That brings up two thoughts I'll give you in parallel here. So one is I think you're absolutely right. And that's again, I want to come back to one of the reasons I made this show is like I don't know what to do about that other than
Hmm.
to have these conversations and try to meet people one on one, two on two, or whatever the reach of this is in our conversations. But I think the only way you can bring people out of these again, these echo chambers and these bubbles and these and the caste system that you mentioned is to try to get them to think at a level of complexity that they aren't. And which is so difficult because
Hmm.
I find it very frustrating, even in my own life, is having very well-informed, meaningful conversations with people, and they're nodding the whole time, and you're
Hmm.
agreeing, and you're getting them to think deeper, and then you come back to them 2 weeks later, and Fox News or CNN has weighed down their
Yeah.
cognitive ability, and now they're spewing the same talking points they were 3 weeks ago. And
Yeah.
so it is a continual thing. It's not a I've done that, I've broken through, now that person's an enlightened human. There's a nature of you constantly you need to be vigilant and have these conversations. But that is to say that my point is I think that there is a nature of trying to bring up the dialogue, trying to raise the bar of
Hmm.
human um, interaction and how we are framing these conversations, how we're framing the viewpoints and the paradigms in which we view the world, so that we're not getting into these left right divides, these echo chambers, and these just very low IQ conversations about viewing difficult topics. So that's kind of point number one is just let's just have more and more conversations. I gotta hope that these are eventually going to work. That's the Thomas Aquinas philosophy of throwing the starfish back in the water one at a
Hmm.
time. That's all you can do. You can't solve the entire
Hmm.
beach bed of death or dying, but you can save them individually. So that's kind of one point. The other point I wanted to latch on to, you mentioned caste system, which made me think of another point that we may or may not agree on or disagree on for different reasons. But the future, I think, holds a tremendous capacity for a caste system to develop and a
Hmm.
bifurcation of society
Hmm.
into the augmented and the unaugmented. And I wrote a short
Hmm.
story about this. I don't know if you read it or not, called the obsolete Mr. Sterling. I
Mm.
encourage you to read it. I often take some of these ideas that I'm struggling
Hmm.
with or writing about, and I turned it into to narrative. So it was a fun one because it kind of get to a fast forward to 100 years from now, and you have the haves, meaning the people who have gotten the augmentation.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a cranial implant, or in this case, it was a chip that you get put in your brain, and those that do not, that the very few, the remnant who have decided to hold off. And those that have it have access to tremendous processing
Hmm.
power. They can think faster and be stronger and be more plugged into the world of technology, or I should say information at their fingertips. And those that don't are just cognitively limited and unable
Hmm.
to keep up both in the workplace as well as school. And so you've created this artificial caste system, which sounds, again, it is very sci-fi in today's world, but I don't think, pragmatically speaking, it's that
Hmm.
far off from where we're headed, if we are to continue at the same exponential growth curve that we are with the technologies that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. A couple points. I mean, one, yeah, like similarly to earlier, I think some of this is already happening. With the invention of CRISPR, if you're familiar with that technology now, gene editing is
Oh,
kind of
yes.
available. And so, the way that that's already kind of informing rich people's sense of eugenic transformations of their offspring and kind of stuff is entering that conversation in a real way. But in terms of even just the most extreme bit, yeah, I mean, I do think that there is and probably will be, unless something dramatic changes, an increasing of this division of have and have nots, that kind of vast inequality that is accelerated by these kinds of technologies. There are a couple of things that also I would qualify that with, though. One is that we already see this, and I think it's actually a good thing. It's sort of AI semicolon DR. Yeah, no, is that right? It's sort of too long didn't read,
TLDR?
but
Yeah.
this is AI didn't read, right? It's sort of like
Okay.
it's sort of someone just it's just slop, right? And so as this
Yeah.
stuff proliferates,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what first seemed like, oh wow, now I'll be able to write a brilliant response in a way I never could. Everyone's now will just be like, I'm not reading that. That's dumb. You didn't make it. So a lot of these things have their own inflationary element to them, you could say, right? As this stuff kind of scales more, then it means less, so that it like the value is actually
I
deduced.
find that particularly frustrating in the era in which I, and probably you too, have started writing a lot, is the
Mm.
same era in which AI has kind of taken
Mm-hmm.
off. And it's very frustrating to me. It's like I have to get questions all the time from people who like, oh, you're an author. All right. Well, how much of that did you write? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
every word. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
well, that's good for you.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
frustrating because you
Well,
have to
if that's
almost
true,
validate
then I
your
mean,
own.
yeah, at this point, maybe we should start putting, no AI was used to actually write this document or something on things that kind of those kinds of statements will probably become more valuable. But then the other thing I wanted to throw out there too is that um, we've had a we collectively have had a bad track record with predicting what actually produces sort of success. There's this
Mm,
modernist vision in which, oh, if people just had more access to information and we could democratize knowledge, then that would even out social inequality, right? And so people like, Carnegie and these big philanthropists, gave millions of dollars to build public libraries and this whole thing with the notion that if you build it, they will come, people raise themselves up out of poverty and all this stuff. And it didn't really happen that way. And the same thing then with the internet. It's like, oh no, this totally changes the game and everyone will have access to all information ever. And we watched cat videos,
mm,
so it's like just having the implant doesn't necessarily give you a leg up because there is something at the end of the day that goes into the way that a person gets transformed by actually engaging a whole book, reading the whole thing, integrating it, like what we actually mean by intelligence. And I think AI is actually really surfacing this in an important way, is not the kind of intelligence that AI can do really well, which is, yeah, prediction based and it's just sort of more of the
mhm.
same. Like there's a way that human learning is really currently still unique, in which that's it deeply reshapes the mind, and that's actually through a deep learning process that you're generating new connections and you're able to be more functionally adaptive in the world. And so even if these kinds of technologies take hold, I think there's always going to be a place for that in some capacity, that it's not just a matter of having access to the information. It actually matters, what you do with that information, or if you even access the information, these kinds of things. So um,
Yeah, what you see, I think, and you're saying this very well, is that you're almost seeing a race to the bottom when it
yeah.
comes to our use of technology has had a self-defeating mechanism built into it. And from everything from the calculator when it was invented, oh, we're going to do such greater math problems now. Well, no,
Hmm.
now we're not learning
Yeah.
the multiplication tables, or again, now you're having AI. You have papers written by AI and then graded by TAs using AI
Yeah.
to grade them. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just the dumbification of America, dumbification of the world, frankly, on a global scale. And that again, it goes to the heart of the again, coming back to the postmodern motif. It's like we are an intellectually or culturally, I should say. I don't want to be too culturally insensitive, but I do think we've gotten to the point where we are have a maturity of that of adolescence,
Hmm.
and we have these great tools that we're now given, and we're not using them to the capability that they
Yeah.
can be used for. And
Yeah.
I just don't know how to get out of that rut.
Yeah.
Again, going back to the nature of money, we saw, hey, we're going to be completely untethered from the gold standard. We're going to
Hmm.
have achieve new heights. Well, what did we do with that? We've made the rich richer and poorer because we
Hmm.
printed so much money and inflated asset bubbles, right? So like these things that we've done with the great grandiose um, goals and visions of making man go on to the next higher
Hmm.
heights is actually used to subjugate us and turn us into lesser forms of ourselves. And I think AI is just the next manifestation of that. So it's not exactly
Yeah.
unique. It's
Yeah.
just probably the most powerful. So it's again, and using the analogy of the kid finding his father's gun, now the kid's found, he hasn't grown up intellectually. He's just found his father's nuclear weapon. I
Hmm.
don't know what he's
Yeah.
doing with that hanging out in the closet, but you know, it's it's a much more powerful same, but the script hasn't changed. It's just swapped out for a much more powerful weapon. And what bothers me and what frustrates me is we're not seeing again the evolution of our cultural. So again, the
Yeah.
cultural critique is always there, and it's almost old hat at this point to say, hey, we're not mature as a society, and we can point fingers all day as to why that is. But until we see that growth, we're not going to be able to utilize a powerful technology like AI to its fullest.
Hmm.
In fact, it's going to make us weaker and lesser
Yeah.
beings as a result.
Yeah, I mostly share that sentiment. I mean, um, I I do think that there are ways that if we actually cared about this stuff, we could make a difference. And I think for me, a lot of that starts with education. I think, there are two intervention sites that to me seem the most give you the most leverage in this kind of a collective problem. And one of them is worldview, and the other is education. Worldview is interesting because you can give people a frame and they don't necessarily have to level up. It's a content thing that they can kind of download, and then it shifts their orientation. Education, though, is really important because that's where everything starts. And if we want an intelligent society able to deal with nuance and complexity and actually gain the wisdom required to harness and handle these tools, then why on earth did we destroy our education system? And then you actually, so I find that topic to be its own thing, and there are specific things that we could be doing that would radically probably not save the current situation, but at least the next generation would put us on
Sure.
a better track. And so yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I 100% agree with that sentiment. I think education is often pointed to as the grand panacea of all cultural ills. And like,
Mhm.
oh, if we just had better education, then people would be less selfish and less or smarter or they'd add more complexity to their lives. I don't necessarily see that manifesting itself. I see the same inherent vices in the person who has an Harvard Ivy League education and those that have, quit after high school. So again, I don't know if it probably is education, but not with a capital E. It's more of the idea of
Yeah.
educating oneself in a real meaningful way. And
Yeah.
you can get everything you need from your education with a library card, or even more importantly, an internet connection, than you can from any of the academia that you see in the college space, and certainly in high school and state-run education is laughable. I mean, you and I have had those conversations with
Yeah.
our own sister about how ridiculous it's become. So
Yeah.
I don't see it as a panacea, but I do see education as a paradigm if it was handled correctly
Right.
or allowed
Well,
to
yeah.
foster
And
in a meaningful
that's what
way.
I mean. I mean, it's off education is a variable that you can look at and how many years of schooling. And then, no, that's not what I mean. But development is really what I mean. But how
Okay.
do people get developed? How do you increase your hierarchical complexity to manage more complexity? Well, the
Well, let's
education system is really
let's
where that
dive
would
into
happen.
that though,
Yeah.
and maybe this is a little far field of where this
I think our
conversation is.
audience can handle it. I think
Okay,
they'll
well, that's
appreciate
good.
it.
I don't know. I don't have a lot of confidence in our audience. Um, but so education, so let's just take that and ball and run with it a little bit. So let's just say, because I'm always struggling with how we can very clearly, I think, diagnose the problem, but the
Hmm.
solution is so much more elusive, in my opinion. And so
Yeah.
let's just say it's education. Well, what does that look like? And what does it physically look like in today,
Yeah.
2026? I have a young child. She just turned 10. What
Hmm.
should I be doing as a father of hers to get her more plugged in to the metaphysical, to the rational, to
Uh,
the componentry of getting her to think more in complex topics? Right now, she spends half her day watching people play YouTube
yeah.
videos, not play video games. Now we're going a level beyond that. It's she watches other people watch watch YouTubes of them playing video games. It's really that meta, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
blown away by it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, those are a couple of different questions. The second question, which is what, I mean, I would say, yeah, like screens, no, like there shouldn't be screens before, I don't know, at least probably 10. Like so screens shouldn't factor into it. There should be and then once that does start to become developmentally appropriate, then there's a lot of monitoring that, and there's screen time, and then that's closely monitored. So, you know, yeah. I mean, people would joke back in the day, oh, the television will rot your brain. And there's like, those people. It's like, no, it really did. And so,
Hmm.
and this has gotten worse and worse. So it really will rot the brain. And it rots the brain for a number of reasons, which we could get into. But yeah, you want sensory motor activity. You want movement. The entire basis upon which all knowledge is later built up in life ultimately has a physical interaction with the world basis. So if all you're doing is flipping things across an iPad or playing this or with a mouse, like you're stultifying, you're limiting, you're inhibiting, you're narrowing your whole range of interactive relationships with reality. And so you're going to not get shit very well later on when you're like, wait, I don't understand why that did that. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, but this leads more directly into the first question, which is I think the policy, like the structure question. How should we set up an education system that actually works? And the first thing we want to do is throw out this stupid standardized testing with the No Child Left Behind. Get rid of all that. There's a lot of evidence that shows why all that is terrible. You basically have kids being educated according to where they're at, the range of their actual abilities, not by age. So you
Hmm.
restructure the whole thing. You don't just put everyone in the same grade because they're the same age, as though that's some meaningful thing. So people are actually learning where their leading edge is. Most of early education is physical activity, being outside, moving around, social interaction, these kinds of things. And then you actually have to start using the right metrics, which now finally first exist for the first time, of using things like hierarchical complexity and lectical scoring and stuff like that to actually track how minds are developing and see where they're developmentally missing things and all this stuff. So we have the tools, we have the developmental theory, we know how this should work, but our current system is set up with all the standardized testing and the No Child Left Behind stuff. We also need to jettison well-intentioned but very destructive sort of policies that basically cause behavior issues to proliferate and upend the classroom.
Hmm.
And there have been probably over the past 20 years, there's been this way that certain Supreme Court cases and legislation have been misused to basically give the disruptive kids in a classroom just carte blanche to just destroy everything. And so that totally ends the learning experience, makes people feel unsafe, could even be traumatic for people. So actually then identifying kids who are not just like developmentally delayed, but like working with real learning issues or trauma or just behavior issues that are they're too disruptive, those kids shouldn't be in the same classroom where people are learning in a different sort of way. So we should be trying to yeah, make the most adequate learning environments for different people with their different capacities, while also balancing simultaneously as best we can the social interpersonal elements to all this. Because, you know, we're also social beings, and it's not just a matter of the facts and learning in a certain way. Like you also want to be relating to your peers, and there's lifespan specific things. So that's a super truncated version of it. But like, yeah, there's like a
Yeah.
10-point policy plan that if you implemented that, and then also found good teachers and paid them a right amount of money and stuff like that, then yeah, the next generation of kids wouldn't be what the current crop is. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, that's a very cogent way of putting, I think, a very complex issue. It makes me think, and I laugh to kind of bring this up, but like you can have a political theorist talk all day about how the nature of policy needs to work, and then fast forward and Trump gets elected, So
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen here, after all hearing you talk, is like we could do all those things, and I
Mm-hmm.
think we should, obviously. But what's going to happen instead is we're going to hang on to our iPads and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
get force-fed 10 hours of TV and
Yeah.
YouTube. And so the only way that we're going to be able to evolve is by putting that chip in our children's
Yeah.
brains because they
Yeah.
won't have the cognitive ability to spatially deal with the world around them. So again, it's a race to the bottom. And I think we're seeing that culturally, we're seeing that in every other area of the
Yeah.
postmodern era is we can do all these great hard things. We can take the medicine if we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to, right? Oh, we could take the medicine. We could get well, but I'd much rather keep
Yeah.
drinking the alcohol Kool-Aid or whatever the analogy would be. I'd
Well,
rather stay sick because
yeah.
it hurts too much to take the
Yeah.
medicine. So I'm just going to keep my high going instead.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree.
I
I mean,
think it's lazy.
I will say though, I mean, reality has a good track record, right? So like reality catches up.
Well,
So
that's
it's
my
not,
point.
yeah. And I mean, exactly what that looks like, we'll have to see. But you can only be racing to the bottom for so long before you reach bottom. And you'll know
Mm.
because reality starts resisting you so hard that things literally start falling apart. I mean, when we talk about the meta crisis in meta modern spaces, we're seeing this happening. We're like, okay, reality is catching up to us. Um, and wherever you want to point your lens, whether it's, going off the gold standard and printing endless money, or just keep, using fossil fuels as we see the temperature rising.
I
Uh,
think we're up to 48 genders now. Be happy to know.
there's yeah, so there's a million things that we're just sort of like, this is unfolding, and we're not going to do anything about it, but eventually there are reactions, and usually that's going to be reality. I sometimes, though, it's a kind of political or cultural reaction, I think, which we're also seeing, which I think is mostly unhelpful, but it's actually probably more pragmatically going to be what's going to interrupt some of these trends, and it's going to be ugly in its own way, but it's going to be right because, like, for example, you know if you did want to really kind of throw a wrench in the whole AI transcendence thing, well, if you get enough cultural excitement around the idea of a soul, then, as classically understood, then, and there's a big religious revival, and then, you do actually wind up burning down the data centers and having a crusade against the AI stuff. Well, that's going to stop it. I would say that's not the most complex, response, and it's going to actually be rather regressive. But like, maybe cultural evolution unfolds a lot of the times through these kinds of other mechanisms that, whatever. But I'm
Yeah.
not advocating for that. I'm just saying, like, that's actually more likely than, oh, we're going to fix the education system. People are going to start thinking complexly, and then we're going to get on top of this stuff. There's all that. And one last thing I'll say is, it's always the best of times and the worst of times. And I do think that this is an accelerating thing where, yeah, if you go forward 10 years from now, I actually do think things are going to be a lot better and a lot worse. And
Mm.
I think that's just kind of the way it is. And then actually the second last thing I'll say is, I think
PPSS.
I think if people understood this more as a genuinely, like, if you're a progressive social minded person, let's say you're like a I don't know, you're even a Marxist, or like you really care about inequality and these kinds of things, the people who are going to be hurt most are the people in this kind of emerging caste system who
Mm.
don't have the means of, necessarily, or the support, or the cultural conditioning, or the parenting, or whatever it is, the environment, all sorts of things to commit to, a lifelong learning process, and caring about education. These are the
Mm.
people who get trapped in cycles of poverty and addiction and bad health and all this stuff. And it's like, if we want to actually, care about people who suffer under these kinds of things that we're talking about, then, we should actually care about, development and changing our education system, and actually doing this stuff. This is not elitist. I mean, I will admit, talking about these things often might sound so, oh, there are people who get it and people who don't. And I understand that kind of critique. But like, ultimately, if we want to see greater social equality, then we've got to acknowledge that the people who are currently kind of on the top of the power hierarchy have the means and the resources that is perpetuating this, and the people who don't, are being kind of hammered by it. So
Left
I don't know if that
behind.
makes sense, but yeah, it's, yeah.
Yeah, no, and if I was a better podcast host, I'd probably leave it at that great Dickensian witticism at the end. But I do want to bring one last thing to the
Sure.
fold, because I mean, that was all great points, all you just said, and I can't disagree with any of it. But bringing this back to the AI topic, because I did want to make
Hmm.
sure that we end on that. I want to ask you a question that is, I think we started with, but I don't know if I got a clear answer. Let me phrase it this way. So I posited that AI is our inevitable destiny, or I should
Hmm.
say, the the fusion of biology and technology in some way. And I think it'd
Hmm.
probably be as impossible for me to try to guess what that would look like as an ant would be trying to solve quantum physics. But 100, 200, 300 years from now, we're not even going to recognize the world in which we live. It's going to be so infused with technology, and the exponential growth curve is going to continue to spike, and it's going to change the way that our world looks. So my question is basically this. A, if you agree with that premise, and I think you do, let me just pause, say, do you agree with that premise or not?
I qualified a little bit, but
All right,
yeah, go on.
fair enough. So qualifications aside, if that premise is more or less accurate, um, I was very intrigued, and this does bring it a little sci-fi, so maybe this is beyond metamodernism, but I was very intrigued, and I haven't stopped thinking about something that Elon Musk said in an interview. I think it was 5 or 6 months ago. It was maybe a Joe Rogan podcast. I don't remember exactly where, but he talks about the container theory. And I don't know if you and I have talked about this before. And essentially, it's this, is that he says that, well, if you look at the emergence of and the evolution of, let's just say, video games, started with Pong, you had two ball, arrow ball, and two, lines on a screen,
Hmm.
and now you have, today simulated realities and VR systems with tens of thousands, millions of concurrent users, and
Hmm.
that happened in the space of 25 years in a future reality that's hundreds of years from now, or maybe thousands of years from now, we are going to be able to create realities that are going to
Mm.
be basically distinguishable from
Hmm.
modern reality, from tactile touch, is that we
Yeah.
already have reproduced what visual
Yeah.
sensory perception looks like. So tactile touch will be there.
Hmm.
So we're really not that far off from, and that's just with a headset. Now,
Hmm.
imagine what you can do with chips and other things that create resonances inside the human brain, or maybe again, there's pulling the human brain outside of its container, its human shell into a higher consciousness. So the question is a long-winded question, but it's basically saying, so he said something to the effect of, I think he was asked by Rogan, so what's the chance that we're going to have that type of reality in the future?
Hmm.
1 in 1 billion? And Rogan flipped the switch and says, well, I know he did his standard. He sat there for like a half a minute, just thought about the question. I love hearing interviews with him.
You mean Musk did this?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Musk. Yeah.
what did I
Okay. Yeah.
say?
I said Rogan, but
Rogan.
yeah.
Yeah, Musk did this. He answered the question by saying, actually, no, I think the chance that we are not in a simulated reality is probably 1 in 1 billion,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because this is probably, if we had the ability to create these things, we'd be creating billions of them, and
Hmm.
then we'd be having these again, these test tubes of
Yeah.
sensory perception, and probably be doing these as incubators for the soul. So that's where
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued by this, because if AI is to have this evolutionary componentry to it, and we are going to be taking the human spirit into the next step,
Hmm.
I'm wondering if we are going to basically be creating our own incubators for the soul. And I know that you didn't necessarily agree with that word earlier when I used it. The soul is not something that maybe you and I agree on, but maybe the fact that we're living in a simulated reality is
Hmm.
our own of our own higher orders making, is
Hmm.
allowing the human condition to flourish in a way that that it couldn't otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm very open to that. I think that that's a very viable metaphysical frame of reality. Um, so I'm actually less averse to that than like the notion that we'll disconnect from, our biological bodies and upload our brains to the cloud. Because I actually see these as a little bit different kinds of things. Um, you know, there's some work that it really matters, but I think yeah, here it is. There's this book from this guy. Actually, he's involved with the institute that I'm a part of as well. The beginning and the end, the meaning of life in a cosmological perspective. One of the things he gets into is Clement Vidal is not so much like simulations that we're generating simulations and then putting brains into, simulations, but that we're actually inventing universes.
Hmm.
So it's a kind of what would you call it? Sort of a uh yeah, cosmological selection theory. And if you think about where our universe came from, as best we can tell, with the Big Bang and all that, well, where did that come from? Who set the constraints? This gets like things like the anthropic principle, like the fine tuning and all this stuff, right? Well, these have historically led to arguments for God, but really it's an argument for a higher intelligence. So if there's
Hmm.
some higher intelligence outside of the system that got this one going, then that fine-tuned those constraints, well, was that a person-like intelligence, or was that an evolutionary process that hit on those constraints? So my point is that, yeah, there's an interesting, so and then so what he kind of suggests, and other people are talking about this as well, that basically, yeah, if you kind of run this tape long enough, there is a way in which knowledge winds up simulating and reproducing itself. And so you get a scenario in which we're not just creating like hyper real simulation matrix environments. We're actually creating universes in which the next kind of generation of soul can unfold. That's a very compelling idea, because, you know, and again, I'm not sure if I've made this point very clearly before, but I don't think that I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what consciousness is, that you can think that you can just take it and upload it into a cloud.
No, and I
So
think we agree.
yeah.
We would agree
Oh,
with
okay.
that
Okay.
completely. No,
All
and
right.
but and so the humanity plus faction, for example, I'm not sure if you've studied up on them, or let's just say Silicon Valley
Uh-huh.
componentry of the transhumanistic movement will say that you can. I mean that
Right. Right.
they've outright said that, and they're I think analogous to thinking that, let's just say, the spark of humanity is like a song that you're having on a violin, right? And it's beautiful, but you can record the song because that's the human condition, and you can put that in the digital cloud,
Hmm.
and you've preserved humanity. And I
Hmm.
think that that's a flawed
Yeah.
read of the whole thing. Again, what I
Yeah.
wrote about is, I think that a better analogy, and Thomas Aquinas would agree with this, is that no, the soul, again, for using that word, is a melding of the body and the mind in a very intricate and almost unexplainable way. So the soul is actually, in that analogy, is the violin itself. It's the wood,
Mm.
and it's the horsehair bow against the
Hmm.
strings, and it's producing the music. So you may be able to
Yeah.
recreate the song and put it in the cloud, but it's going to be dead and lifeless, and it's going to be
Right.
a bland
A zombie.
imitation, a
Yeah.
zombie song, right?
Yeah.
You'll
No.
never, what the beauty of the human condition is that the bow and both the bow and the violin fall to dust.
Yeah.
That's what makes it beautiful.
Mm.
If these things live forever. And that's why I have problems with the transhumanism. It's
Hmm.
about man becoming God instead of man
Hmm.
discovering God. There's
Hmm.
again, there's a lack of I think they have their hearts in the right place. They're trying to reach towards the sacred. They're trying
Hmm.
to reach beyond themselves. And they recognize they have a meaning-shaped hole in their lives, but becoming a thing is not the same as finding a thing. And I think that it's very far afield from where they need to be.
Yeah, I mean, you're raising a lot of really big things that maybe we can have another conversation around, because this is all really good. A couple things. One is, you know, there is also another alternative route. So let's say finding God is one, becoming God through technology is what these guys are pursuing. But then you can also explore a deep spiritual, mystical path, which is a becoming one with the divine that isn't a technological thing. It's actually precisely by leading into your own conscious experience that you find, people say the divine root in everything. So anyway, it's not necessarily, in my view, that becoming one with the divine is itself the problem. It's how you think you're going to do that. And in that sense, you can either do that with an idol, like, the Silicon Valley stuff, or through the infinite kind of depths of the richness of reality itself, which is the
Hmm.
icon. But anyway, so that's kind of point one. Um, and then, yeah, what was the other thing I wanted to say there? I think that, hmm. So, granted that, oh yeah, I want to make this point, because actually we're talking about all these problems with AI it's not the evil, oh, Skynet or this kind of thing or the Matrix. It's these other things that we actually do have to be much more concerned
Watch
about.
us be both wrong, and it really does turn into Skynet, and we're,
Yeah, right.
well,
Yeah.
missed that
Oh
one.
well. But what I am actually really concerned about is I actually think it's not too far away that we could definitely do this, which is make a simulation of one of us based on all the information that has existed about us that we feed into a computer, that would simulate me just the way I'm acting right now, right? Where, like, you understand what I'm saying? It's like the
As long as
basic.
I could give him a swear jar of big
Yeah.
words.
Yeah, and he'd reply just the way that was, because, provided there was enough of a input that could, properly predict based on all this. I think we're
Mhm.
not that far away. And
No.
imagine people doing that with loved ones or whatever who have deceased or something. Or someone says, "Oh, I'm just going to commit suicide so that because I can just do this now," right? And then actually, right? But there's no consciousness there. It's all just a simulation. And so
Yeah,
yeah.
interestingly enough, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Yeah.
watching a whole bunch of weird TV shows recently, and Matlock, believe it or not, there's a
Okay.
reboot of the show Matlock, and it
Uh,
had a whole episode about this.
oh, really? All right. Well,
Yeah, it was
so,
about creating these in the therapy session, you could
uh,
create an AI version of a lost loved one and have conversations with them as they existed, and the ethical and moral
yeah.
problems with that. Yeah, so we're kind
You
of,
know, you think you've got a creative, original idea, and then you find out
and then you found out that
it's already a
Matlock has
Matlock
already,
did it.
yeah,
Yeah. So
that's a new low for you.
yeah, puts you in your
No,
place.
but this has been a really, the sake of time, I just want to
Yeah.
say I've really enjoyed this conversation. Again, we could probably turn this into a 3 or 4 hour long conversation. We've actually just scratched the surface. There's a
Yeah.
lot below the iceberg there. Do you want me to give you the last word though? Is there anything else you want to, any
Yeah.
profundities that you want to give?
I mean, it's hard because yeah, we really did. This is still kind of at the surface, because I do want to unfold a whole line of argumentation that I think can properly orient people to this space, at least as I see it, drawing on all these big picture models that have been very clear. And maybe at the end of the day, it just comes back to just the problem of like, is there an audience for that? Do people have the interest in it? But I do think that if we really care about this, we're going to have to close that gap. Like, and I don't know exactly what that looks like. A lot of my work in the institute that I work at focuses on trying to do this in various ways. But yeah, how do you give people a different map of reality and the human and their human's role in the cosmos and what consciousness is and all this in a way that can level up our understanding to get where it needs to be. Um, I, unfortunately, right now, a lot of it is having long conversations and reading big books, and absent that, what do we do? So that's, I don't know, just a gesture to the fact that there's this huge, all that we didn't get into in terms of like painting a picture of what reality might be, and therefore how we would see AI in those terms. So,
Well,
um,
I will give you a white pill if you've heard
yeah,
that term before that
sure.
I'm excited by because I
Hmm.
used to be very not nihilistic, but just very sad about the state of, and I still am, the state of the
Hmm.
world. Seeing the polarization that takes place and the
Hmm.
race to the bottom. But you are seeing again these mediums, podcasting
Yeah,
specifically, and having
yeah,
people really resonate with these long form conversations, long 3, 4, sometimes
yeah.
like Alex, like a Friedman conversation, go like 6 or 8 hours. People are connecting with these things, and they're
Yeah.
really resonating with people in a way that has not manifested itself in a long time because we
Mm-hmm.
live in a very commercial filled,
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you 5 minutes of truth between
Yeah,
45 minutes of propaganda,
yeah.
in the corporate media sphere. And people have been glued to that for, I think, the larger part of the last half century. But now
Mm-hmm.
there's a point, there's a breaking
Yeah,
point that's taking place, and people are starved for real meaning, real
yeah,
conversations, complexity. Again, you can only have a diet of vapid ice cream and sugar
yeah.
for so long before your body craves meaningful
Totally.
meat and veggies. So
Yeah.
I think that this is the, not to be too hubristic about it, but I think conversations like this are the meat and potatoes of
Mhm.
the cultural evolution that we want to see in the world. We want to be the change we want to see in the world, right? So this is the kind of conversation that's going to have it.
Yeah.
Maybe not you and I specifically, but just more and more complexity being added to our conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll end on that positive note as well, which is one of the biggest mistakes that I think people make when they look to the future is it's the extrapolation illusion. It's like, oh, the line has been going up, so it will keep going up. And I mean, you're very aware of this kind of logical fallacy. And not only do we not anticipate, uh-oh, lines going down now, but we also don't anticipate the actual like reactions to things. That for every force there's an equal and opposite reaction kind of a thing, right? Where um I remember when Obama got elected, people were saying there's not even going to be a Republican Party, in another 20 years. People were very convinced that like this was the future.
Well,
And
they said the
then
same thing when Trump got elected.
exactly, this is my point. So it's like, um, you know, there are these reactions to things all the time. And so I think what's happening right now, in the same way that you're talking about this hunger for long form content and that sort of thing, I would love to see, and I think you see glimmers of it, but Like for example, like there are these Gen Z kids who, they're basically Luddites. They're like, no, it's cool now to not have a phone, to not do any of this stuff. It's a
Mm,
reaction. There's a lot of people I know who hate AI. Anything AI that they ever see, they're like, that's garbage. So there's a lot of reaction, and that's both positive and negative. But the reaction I'd like to see is the reading.
mhm,
It's a very hard thing, and it took me a long time to get comfortable reading a lot. But the more people can get comfortable reading books, this is actually, I think, a really, this is the like currently the necessary thing that we need for the kinds of complexity that we need to navigate these issues. So maybe there will, in the next couple of years, come a time, a huge fad where the best thing you can do is just turn off your screen and go find the biggest, juiciest, fattest nonfiction book and just learn systems theory. So I don't know.
I love that. I also, I mean, you may see this as regressive, but I see a large number of people starting to come back to faith
Hmm.
again as part of the meaning crisis, and they're choosing, again, atheists and agnostics are choosing either Christian or even some of the more uh, staunchest Christian faiths to really kind of sink their teeth into, which is interesting because again, it's just a starved in the postmodern world we live in. They're starved for meaning. They're starved for rigidity. They're starved for not
Hmm.
being told that they're endless failures and there's no way out of this. There's this religion without being religion.
Hmm.
Um, the cultural beat down of the say the typical the what do they call the male hierarchy, the masculine hierarchy, and how evil that is. I mean, there's all these things that have kind of
Hmm.
led people. And again, maybe it's the pendulum is swinging back to the left, and that's not necessarily a good thing. We do want to see metamodern synthesis take place. We don't want to just go to regress.
Yeah.
But I do see that a yearning for meaning, a yearning for
Yeah.
education, a yearning for books, like you were saying, a yearning for something greater than ourselves is going to be very, very helpful in achieving that because just endless deconstruction is not how we build
Yeah.
the house. You can't just tear the house down brick by brick and then lament the fact that you don't have a roof over your head. You have to pick up a hammer and start building again. And I think that
Yeah.
that's where we're entering into, and that's what metamodernism is all about. So, with
So
that, again,
excellent.
Brennan, I really appreciate you being here. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for being such a philosopher, poet, and a Renaissance man.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and happy to continue the conversation whenever.
Well, that was today's episode, Metamodernism Uncensored. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you again